Wall Street's oldest law firm appears to be the next in line to bend the knee and strike a deal with President Trump. The New York Times reports that the White House has been in touch with the firm of Cadwalader, Wickersham, and Taft, the firm that once employed Trump's attorney Todd Blanche, who represented Trump in criminal cases and is now with the Justice Department. The deal would have this firm offer pro bono services for some causes that they agree upon. Meanwhile, high-profile Democrats are currently facing backlash among their friends and the Democratic legal community for continuing to take paychecks from corporate law firms that have already cut deals with the Trump administration. Among them, former Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff, the husband of Kamala Harris. Sources tell me that Emhoff, a partner at Wilkie, Farr & Gallagher, condemned his firm's decision to enter into this agreement at a charity dinner last week, speaking to the audience, telling the crowd that he wanted to push back on the executive order that was pending, perhaps, but he had been overruled by the other partners. CNN's Evan Pettis joins me now. And Evan, two congressional Democrats are asking for details on these deals between the Trump White House, Trump administration, and these law firms. What specifically do they want to know?
Well, Jake, they're referring to these deals as shakedowns, essentially, and you have a number of these firms, including, of course, Wilkie, the one you just mentioned, Paul Weiss, Milbank, and Skadden. These are big law firms that reach deals with the president, essentially avoiding the fate of other firms that have received these executive orders that threaten things such as canceling security clearances, preventing them from even being able to enter federal buildings. So what they're asking for is more details. Who put them in touch with the White House to get these deals done? Exactly what the terms of these deals are. I'll read you just a part of this letter from Jamie Raskin and Senator Blumenthal. The unprecedented abuse of executive power to settle personal scores is part of a broader effort by President Trump to use the powers of the presidency to intimidate and silence his perceived enemies. And look, it's not just the Democrats saying that, Jake. You can look at the executive orders themselves, and the president makes clear that he is targeting these firms because they represented people who opposed him or people who essentially he's mad at.
Like, for example, Wilkie, Doug Emhoff's firm, I think they represented those two Georgia election workers whom Rudy Giuliani had defamed, and, you know, he was, I think, $150 million fine. Have we heard anything from the law firms or the White House specifically, other than the president's social media posts, about these letters?
Not a word, Jake, not from any of the ones that we reached out to. The only one that did respond was Sullivan and Cromwell, which, as you know, was accused of being one of the firms that was essentially reaching out to try to poach lawyers and their clients, essentially, because they knew the president was targeting these firms. And they deny that this happened. They say that Bob Giffra, who is a chairman of the firm there, simply was trying to help facilitate a deal between Paul Weiss, one of the firms that did sign these deals, and the White House. And I should note, Jake, that again, we reached out to the White House and all of them to see whether they were going to turn over this information to these Democrats, and they did not respond.
Evan Pettis, thanks so much. My next guest was an associate at the firm Skadden Arps, but she resigned on March 20th, stating that she was concerned with the way the Trump administration was already targeting corporate law firms. That was before Trump announced that he had reached a proactive deal with Skadden, and Rachel Cohen joins me now. So, Rachel, you quit a week before the firm even cut a deal officially with the Trump administration, preemptive to any executive order. Trump did post the details of the Skadden deal. It's not like you were wrong. On March 28th, $100 million in pro bono work to causes they both agree on, commitment to merit-based hiring, to name a few. Now, you wrote in your resignation notice, quote, "Like any self-important adolescent, I spent most of my high school history class wondering what I would do in the moments before true horror or chaos, or where my values were tested and demanded great sacrifice. I do not wonder anymore. I know who I am. I thought I knew who we all were." What exactly were you opposed to in the deal that Skadden entered with the Trump administration?
Thanks so much for having me, Jake. And as you pointed out, I didn't know what was in the deal, or even that my firm was certain to strike one, but I was troubled by the lack of collective action across the industry. And I felt like the non-answers that I and many other associates were getting when we asked the firm what the path forward was given the assault on the profession, it felt very likely that Skadden was going to enter a deal. But I actually can't even comment on the specifics of the deal to this day because they have not been publicized outside of Truth Social. And you have Paul Weiss claiming that the deal that the president posted on Truth Social is not exactly accurate to what was agreed. As far as I know, no one within Skadden outside of the partnership has seen what was actually agreed to. And so until I know those specifics, I can't comment directly, but I'm concerned by any kind of capitulation to intimidation tactics by the president.
So there is a lot of criticism of partners like Doug Emhoff for continuing at these firms where they're partners, which I suppose means they make a lot of money, in addition to doing a lot of work, I'm sure, for staying at these firms. Former Trump administration official and former Paul Weiss attorney Neera Tanden said, quote, I think people of principle should quit these law firms. If you're a lawyer who makes $20 million a year, I appreciate the sacrifice that you might make less money because you might lose some clients, but how do you look at yourself, unquote? What do you think of that, and what are you going to do? You weren't making $20 million, you were an associate.
I was not making $20 million, and I would note that everyone who was publicly resigned, as far as I know, there are only 3 of us, and we all worked at Skadden Arps. None of us were making $20 million a year, but we were still in the top 1% of earners, and I think it's telling that we were able to leave those positions, not without financial sacrifice, but because you probably have some savings. And I am so disappointed by the lack of leadership on this. I am grateful for the opportunity to speak about these things, but I think that it's frankly ridiculous that a third-year associate is the one that's having to lead the charge on this when people like the former second gentleman are employed at firms that are cutting deals with Trump. It's not enough to just criticize, you have to leave.
Are there any firms doing the right thing? Are there any, in your view, are there any firms standing up against this?
There are 9 firms in the AmLaw 100, so the top 100 grossing law firms in the country, who signed on to an amicus brief supportive of Perkins Coie, who was the first target of a Trump executive order. And I think that while there are other firms that are fighting the Trump administration on an individual level, and I think that that's very admirable, unless you are standing up before you are targeted, right? That's why I put in my conditional notice prior to Skadden entering a deal, because this moment demands proactivity. Unless you're one of those 9 firms that signed the amicus brief, I don't know that you can argue that you're doing the right thing.
So you're here in D.C., even though you live in a different city, because you testified before the Democrats in Congress today. It's not a hearing because they're in the minority, but they can have little meetings. I want to play a bit of what you said in your testimony.
The administration cannot pick and choose who gets representation. It cannot use executive power to scare lawyers out of advocacy. If we allow any president to dictate who deserves a lawyer, our legal system fails.
Now, the Trump administration's talked about providing more representation to veterans. I don't imagine that is an issue for you. I don't know who wouldn't want to, represent veterans. But what are you worried about? Who are you worried about being forced to represent?
I mean, I am actually even concerned about veteran representation, because a lot of the pro bono that we've done previously on behalf of veterans is for people who are seeking benefits that the government has not paid them. And we know that that's not something that the Trump administration has actually been particularly good on, despite the fact that they claim a lot of support for veterans. Both of my parents are veterans. They served in the U.S. Air Force, and so that is a cause near and dear to my heart. But what I'm particularly concerned about in the very immediate future is attacks that the Trump administration has waged on immigration attorneys broadly. Because a lot of that work does happen pro bono at corporate law firms. It was viewed as very, very uncontroversial, very non-political, to represent specifically people who are seeking political asylum because they are fleeing violence in their home countries. That was a large portion of my own pro bono practice, and I'm concerned that the Trump administration is trying to intimidate law firms out of taking representation like that, because it's not just representation that's directly critical of the administration or challenging unconstitutional actions that they're troubled by. It's broadly anything that Trump views as adverse to kind of his own interests. And I think things like immigration representation and government challenges, even like those on behalf of veterans, could easily fall into that bucket.
Rachel Cohen, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Stay in touch with our team.